Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Kitchen Table Classroom. My name is Kate Schwartz with Calgary Public Library. I'm very pleased to welcome you here today virtually from our homes. With every program at Calgary Public Library and Edmonton Public Library, we like to acknowledge the land where our homes and our schools, our universities are placed. So if you'll join me in land acknowledgement for Treaty 7, this is our children's land acknowledgement that we do at Calgary Public Library. So it is 7 fingers up. Today we acknowledge our Treaty 7 friends, where the Blackfoot meet on elbows bend. That soon came the Tsuut'ina from the Beaver clan, the Aihe Nakota from the mountain lands. Last but not least, the Métis Region 3. We are all treaty people here in Calgary.
Lovely. My name is Emily. I'm from the Edmonton Public Library. I'd also like to share a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Edmonton is located within Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 4. We acknowledge this land as the traditional territories of many First Nations, such as the Nehayao, Dene Suline, Nakota Sioux, Anishinaabe, and Niitsitapi. Many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit footsteps have marked these lands for centuries.
Thank you, Emily. If this is your first time joining us for Kitchen Table Classroom, welcome. This is a series that Calgary Public Library and Edmonton Public Library started over a year ago now in response to COVID-19 and the fact that many children were learning from home. We wanted to provide a webinar series on a variety of topics for caregivers, and we know educators join us as well, that can support the learning that happens at home. So whether your child is in an online classroom or back at school, we hope the Kitchen Table Classroom will provide lots of inspiration and tips and tricks and ideas for you. Tonight's session is all about back to school and the impact of COVID-19 on our kids and the way they learn. And we're happy to offer some ideas and suggestions for how you can support your student as they transition back to school after a disrupted school year. Emily is going to share a little bit of information about Zoom webinar session such as this, and then we'll introduce our speakers and get started.
Perfect. So if you aren't already aware, we are recording this, and this recording and our previous recordings are available on each of our library's websites. If you have any tech issues, please use the chat box. And if you have questions for the panelists, please use the Q&A function. You can put in questions throughout the sessions and we'll get to them all at the end. And just a note that we won't be taking any questions on camera or out loud. So using the Q&A function is how you'll get in touch with us.
Thanks, Emily. I'm very pleased to announce our first speaker tonight. Dr. Kelly Dean Schwartz is Associate Professor at the School and Applied Child Psychology in the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary. He's a registered psychologist who's been engaged in the study of children, youth, and families for over 25 years. Most notably, he focuses on the development, assets, and family strengths that contribute to a healthy development and thriving children. Dr. Schwartz serves on numerous community, provincial, and national boards, advisory committees, and institutes focused on research and training that informs evidence-based psychology services, including prevention and intervention for children, youth, and families. We're very happy to have you, Dr. Schwartz.
Awesome. Thank you, Kate. So good to be with you. Emily, are you going to introduce? Do I go in right now?
I will. I'm going to jump ahead here and I'm going to be introducing Cheryl Shinkaruk, who is the Manager, Programs and Projects with Edmonton Catholic Schools. As a registered certified teacher in the schools and now working at the division level, Cheryl has been engaged in supporting student mental health, healthy living, and active learning through a comprehensive school health approach. As a sessional instructor at the University of Alberta, Cheryl understands the importance of supporting not only the current teachers, but new aspiring teachers entering our schools. She strongly believes in the power of working collaboratively with partners and external organizations. Welcome, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Emily. I'm so pleased to be here today.
We're so happy to have you both. First, we're going to be starting with Dr. Schwartz. So take it away, Dr. Schwartz.
All right. Yeah, I can't, you're going to hear me talk glowingly about Cheryl several times throughout tonight, but so pleased to be presenting with my friend and colleague in Edmonton. And we've got just a great couple of minutes to share with you. And both of us are involved in a study that took place, actually is taking place actively right now, and it started in September of last school year. It's called the COVID-19 Student Wellbeing and Resiliency Study. And it is, as I'm going to describe to you, just we have a wonderful opportunity here to hear from our students here in Alberta about their year-long experience with the pandemic. Now, here's where I jump in and you know, usually would spend a lot more time on this, but I know you are an informed audience if you're joining this group with our public libraries. I kind of cheekily have a title on this slide saying we have a pandemic of opinion. So we not only have a health pandemic, but so much out there in regards to what is happening with our children and youth. We, you know, right from, March of last year, we started to have all the informed and sometimes not so informed perspective on what's going on with our kids. And this is, you could go through and pick off headlines every day in regards to this. In fact, the last one I'm showing you was posted about 5 hours ago by Eva Ferguson here in Calgary Herald about the impact of COVID and what it means to our students. This was entirely the impetus for this study. And in fact, Cheryl knows that when I was contacted by one of the school superintendents here in Calgary, that it was early in the summer of 2020, so about June and July, where we started to think about how students were going to return to school last September. So not just 2 weeks ago, but last September. And this is what came about as a result of that was the study I want to share with you today. And what I noticed quickly was that anything that had come out kind of since March and all the way through the summer of last year was, doing the best that we could to gain insight into what was happening with our children and youth, but very few were asking youth themselves about their experiences of COVID-19. So this is the entire purpose of the study, was to ask a sample of 12 to 18-year-olds from both our Calgary, from both of our Catholic and public schools in Calgary and our Catholic and public schools in Edmonton. And we simply wanted to know, what were their experiences of COVID-19? How was it resulting in stress responses for them? How was it impacting their mental health? And then where were they finding sources of resiliency? So that was the nature of our study. We are so pleased and really blessed to be able to partner with these school divisions. We are now in wave 5. So we are collecting data as we speak. We have collected data in September and December of 2020, and then March and June of last year, and the last school year. And now we have re-engaged with these same students this year. And you can already see we've got almost 1,000 students of the same students that we followed all through last year are answering our surveys this year. Give you the briefest of background, because I'm going to send you a web link or we'll send you a web link to a much fuller description of the study. We were really pleased with our original sample. We had over 2,300 male and female students join us in September of last year. And go back to your grade 10 math class and think about the bell curve and think about distribution. We were really pleased with the distribution of 12 to 18-year-olds that we had in our study, and that followed us throughout our study and are continuing to follow us this September. So we have a nice distribution on gender, a nice distribution on age. Sorry, I click that quickly. Our mean age for our students is just over 14 years of age in our sample. You can see that we, again, without intentionally going out and trying to, stratify our sample, we were really pleased with the culture and ethnicity represented in the students in our sample. You can see that about almost 2/3 are white, but then we also have a very good mix of other cultures and ethnicities in our sample. You can see on our website where we've done some analysis on that to look at the kind of the intercultural differences and similarities in our research. But again, we were very pleased with the sample that we received. This slide I'm showing you jumps ahead right to our June. So this is our wave 4 sample. I wanted to show you, and in most cases tonight, I'm going to try and show you the most recent data that we have, which came from our June 2021 study. You can see that in June, students about almost 6 in 10 had started, kind of in that after March break, and then all the way through to the end of June in person, and they remained in person. You can see about 13% though had a change from in person to online. About 14% were online during this last part of the school year. And then you can see about 15% changed from online to in person. So again, in terms of the diversity of student that we had in our sample, it was really interesting to see how we were able to gather a nice diversity of student experiences based on their school experiences. Now, I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour through the 4 major elements of our study. We talked about to students about their COVID-related health concerns. We asked them questions about COVID-related stress. We asked them questions about their feelings and behavior, which includes some mental health markers. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, we asked them about their resiliency and where they found their strengths and supports through COVID-19 to date. So the first set of questions we asked them was about their experiences of COVID-19. I'm sorry, this is a heavy text slide. I'm breaking all the rules here, but you can see some of the areas that we addressed. We asked them about socializing in their bubbles, which of course early in the pandemic was really important. We asked them about physical distancing. We asked them where they got their news and information. And then what I'm going to share with you is a couple of things tonight about their concern about the COVID-19 impacts. And that's where we're going to focus tonight. You'll see some of the other material on our website if you want to follow that. But I cherry picked out some places I thought would be interesting for us to explore this evening. So the first one, and of course, here we are, 18 months into the pandemic, masking is still part of our daily lives. And so I wanted to show you that, in spades, our students in our sample, and again, keep in mind, these are a sample of almost 2,000 students we're following throughout the school year here in Alberta. You can see that masking hovered around 90%. No matter which time period. So you see on the bottom there, the September and December of 2020, and then March or June of 2021. So students are doing their part to mask. They're doing their part to make sure that they are kind of doing the minimum they can when they go into the public. Notice that on wave 3, which is kind of the orange bar there, that was when the Delta variant really started to show itself in March of 2021. So not surprisingly, that's when we saw the highest amount of masking. It was about 94% at that time. So again, students are very attuned to what is happening around them, of course, and doing what they can to protect others and themselves. When we ask them questions about and ask them very direct questions about how concerned are you about COVID? And we asked this in reference to their own health. And you'll see that, over the course of the 4 waves of our study in the last school year, that again, average was about 37% who are very or extremely concerned. So flip that on its head, and about 63% were only, somewhat or not at all concerned. So teens were certainly aware of the health effects, but when it came to their own health, actually didn't show or report that they were that concerned about the effects of COVID on their health. Now, we asked this question in various forms throughout the survey, and we actually changed some of the questions. Here's a question we asked in survey 4 in June. How concerned are you about catching or contracting COVID-19 or developing severe complications? So here we find that almost 7 out of 10 reported that they are not at all or only somewhat concerned. But then you do have about 3 in 10 students who are very or extremely concerned. So again, notice that 70 and 30 split. You're going to see that, break down a lot tonight. But interestingly, that shows up right when we ask students about this in June. When we asked them, though, about the COVID variants, so the first question was just about kind of COVID in general. Now we ask them about COVID variants. Now you see that the number jumps to about 43% of students who are very or extremely concerned. So they recognize that COVID, it doesn't come in the same shape and form, that it matters what type of COVID is out there, and it matters how at much risk the students feel when they're asked about their concerns regarding catching COVID-19. Of course, we started in March asking them about how comfortable they would be receiving the vaccine. In the fall, this wasn't even a question that we were able to ask because everything was still in development. But come March, we asked students about this question. So look at the change here. This is wave 3 in March. We asked them if they were comfortable receiving a vaccine. 64% were either very or extremely comfortable. We asked this exact same question again in June. Now the number goes from 63% to now 81% who were very or extremely comfortable about getting the vaccine in June. So interesting, youth are following what's happening. They're following what's happening with the health effects, and they're following what is happening with the remedies or how we deal with this with vaccines. Keep that in mind too when we're going to talk about some mental health and stress factors. We asked about how concerned they were about members of their household. And here we found that about 65% of teens were very or extremely concerned about their household health. So now the number has doubled. The percentage has doubled. Remember, it was only about 30% who were very or extremely concerned about their own health. Now it's about 65% who are very or extremely concerned. And by wave 4, this has decreased slightly to about 6 out of 10 or about 61%. So they're more concerned about members of their household than they are themselves. Here's where we found the real effects, though, is that when we asked them about the social impact of COVID-19, things like family confinement and stress, now we find that students who are very or extremely concerned about family confinement and stress, in wave 1 was 47%. And in wave 4 was 56%. So a 10% increase in, just the lag of spending so much time at home, so much time in family confinement. I'm sure all of us think we're very endearing and exciting parents, but even I would be tired of myself after, lots of family confinement in our homes. The last one I'll show you about COVID concerns is in regards to social ties. And you're going to hear Cheryl talk about this later too. This if you remember, being an adolescent, this is what your life is all about, is those social ties. And again, now here we see that there's an increase from September to June of those who are very or extremely concerned about maintaining social ties. That went from 46% to 52%. So over half by June were very or extremely concerned about social ties. And of course, this was so much connected to openings and closings of schools and things like that. And that's where we asked some questions about quarantining. We wanted to know, okay, how much quarantine have students had to experience over the course of the pandemic? And I'm showing you again results here from wave 4 or our June sample. And you can see that 4 out of 10 students said in our June survey that they had to quarantine. So because someone in the classroom or a teacher had tested positive for COVID-19. So they not only have the provincial school closings and reopenings, but they also have the quarantine. So this is obviously impacting, again, not only their educational kind of competence, their connection with their schools, but of course their social connections as well. Let's go to the second part of our study. We wanted to ask questions about the stress that students were experiencing in their lives. I'll let you read up on this more on our website. We used a a pretty well-known measure of stress called the impact of event scale. And the thing I want you to notice is there was three main areas that we looked at. One was, does it intrude on your thoughts? Do you have waves of strong feeling about it? We call that the intrusion scale. There's an avoidance scale, which is how much do students try not to think about it, or do they try not to talk about it even with their friends or with their families. The last one is very interesting too, the subscale of arousal. Is it impacting their sleep? Do you feel like you're startled more easily or feel more nervous? Do you get easily irritable? So this is where we wanted to see again, how is stress related to COVID-19 showing up in their lives? And you're going to see here there's a clinical cutoff score in our total score that is, if you exceed that, you are, essentially meeting some of the symptomatology for a traumatic event. Like, this is not just an annoyance or an irritant to you. This is truly impacting your, your everyday life at various levels. So I want to show you, and I know this is a graph that might be a little confusing. The numbers on the bottom are the waves of the data collection, and there's our three subscales, and then we also get a total score. Focus first on this arousal scale. This is the, again, where it impacts your sleep, your irritability. Do you have trouble, coping with the actual kind of physiological effects of your stress? And here we see that from wave 1 to 4, we had almost a 5% increase in those that were exceeding that clinical cutoff level. It went from just under 10% to almost 14%. So here we've got students who are saying it's not only just, like I said, this is an annoyance to them. This is truly impacting their physiological health in terms of their arousal. Look too down here on the total score, where we went from almost 1 in 4 to 3 out of 10 who said to us that their overall stress reactions to COVID-19 was above that clinical cutoff level. Now let's look at some differences based on their schooling situation. Again, I want to focus here just for sake of time on the total score. Here we found that the in-person to online group and the online only group had significantly higher proportion of those above that clinical cutoff than those who went from online to in-person learning, or who were in the in-person only. So it mattered kind of what form of schooling you were experiencing at a particular time in the school year. And again, this is in wave 4. This is right at the end of the school year. So those that went from in-person to online, that had that kind of annoying switch from being in school to now have to going back to online learning, they showed the highest number who were, exceeding that critical cutoff level in their stress scores. Now, I want to add some context to this, because students weren't going through this in a vacuum. We asked students questions about, did anyone in your family lose their job or have their work hours reduced? Again, we've got over 3 out of 10, 35% saying, yeah, my family, had COVID impact our family income level. This is again what we asked this at wave 3 and 4. Actually, I'm just showing you wave 4 tonight. To make matters worse, again, I'm providing some context to all these numbers. We wanted to know too if students prior to COVID-19 were diagnosed with any learning, cognitive, or psychological disorder. You can see that in our sample, almost 16% of students said that they had been diagnosed. And then we asked them, well, if yes, has the pandemic worsened the symptoms? And here you can see that those that have had a previous diagnosis, 45% of them said that, yeah, their symptoms had certainly worsened over the course of the pandemic. Now, keep those 3 things in mind: the family income hit, the previous diagnosis, and also the worsening of the symptoms. I wanted to just show you a couple quick things about, again, from our CRIES scale, which is our stress scale. I want you to look down here. You'll see those previously diagnosed with a mental health or a cognitive disorder. You can see that their scores on the CRIES total were much higher than those who did not state or indicate that they had a previous health disorder. I want you to also notice that we've actually got age effects here and again, this is at wave 4 of our data collection, that 15 to 18-year-olds were actually indicating that their CRIES or their stress total score was much higher than 12 to 14-year-olds. So this is why when somebody asks me, how are our youth doing? I have to contextualize it with a lot of these factors that are either demographic factors like age, or also what is going on in their lives in terms of previous health factors. Look over here on the right-hand side too. Here's that variable about families who lost income. That's on the right-hand side. You can see that their experience on the CRI's total score across the 4 waves, you can see that those who experienced family income loss, their stress levels got increasingly higher. Whereas those who said that they didn't experience any job or income loss in their families, their stress levels decreased over time. Then look in the middle one there. So not only did we have age differences, but we also had gender differences. Females across all 4 waves had higher reported stress levels than did males. And you can see that males over the course of the pandemic, their stress levels went down a bit, where females kept creeping up. So this is really important for us when we're looking at, again, responses to the pandemic and interventions, because we have to think about the context that kids are experiencing this in. Okay, we're on the home stretch here. Two sections left. We asked them a question. We asked them a series of questions now about their behavior and their mental health, and we used the behavior intervention monitoring assessment system. It's a system that's meant to be used over the course of time. So this is a system that really tries to track how things change over time in terms of student behavior. So I want to show you again, you can spend more time with this on our website, but I want to point out 2 areas of functioning for you. So this is wave 1. So this is right at the beginning of the school year in September. Look at this measure of negative affect. Now, negative affect is, students' experiences of things like sadness, negativity, nervousness. They may be fearful, they might worry a lot. So at time 1, wave 1 in September 2020, we had about 17% of students who were in that high risk range for negative affect. We had another 28% who were in the kind of some risk range, and then we had well over half who were in the low risk range. So keep that in mind, the beginning of the school year last year, those numbers. The other area I want to point out to you is this social. So we measured some adaptive behavior as well. And here you'll see at wave 1 in September, we had over 1 in 4 students saying that, yeah, they were almost clinically concerned about their social functioning. You can see 27% of them were in that kind of concern range. But note that 7 out of 10, again, we're saying, no, my social functioning is actually doing pretty well. I'm in that typical range. Okay, hold this visual in your mind, because I'm going to switch now from wave 1 to wave 4. I'm going to jump all the way from September to June. Now look at what we found in June. So we went from 17% in the high risk range for negative affect now to 25%. This is both statistically, significant, and of course it's also practically significant. Now we've got, again, a large number of students who have gone from, probably some risk range and have now moved up into the high risk range. Look over here at the social functioning, where we had that 27% who were concerned. It's jumped almost 10% now to 36% on the social functioning. So this is really important for us to remember when we're talking about kids functioning, is that the changes that take place are not uniform. This is why our study is so valuable, we think, is because we're able to measure this over the course of time, not just cross-sectionally. Now I want to show you too here that, and I'm going to pick on this negative affect scale, because that's the one about the, that has the, the worry, some anxious feelings, sadness. So look at this negative affect variable. Look at how over the course of time, from time 1 through to time 4, we've got an increase from 17% to 25% who are in that high risk range. Again, in the some risk range, we go from 28% to 31%, so not as much, but we do creep down to under half of students, being in the low risk range by the time we get to wave 4. So again, when I'm asked, okay, are students feeling the impact of the pandemic and kind of the longevity of it? They absolutely are, and it's showing up in the ways that they rate their mental health. I pull on this cognitive and attention one because I know we've got lots of educators probably that are interested in student functioning. Look at the number of students who at wave 1 9% were in the high risk range to wave 4, 15.6%. So these are students that are really having trouble with their distractibility, staying on task, trying to stay focused. I mean, this is, we could probably say this about every person who's existing through COVID-19, but we're certainly seeing it with our youth. Let's go back to that question about previous diagnosis. And again, you can see that big difference between those who had a previous diagnosis on that negative affect variable versus those who did not. And again, we saw a difference between those who had a job loss in their family versus those who did not in their self-reporting on this negative affect. So again, this is really important for us to put this into context. Last thing I'll show you here about negative affect is we had some interesting interactions happening. We had stress interacting with the negative affect variable, and it impacted it by age. We saw that 12 to 14-year-olds were actually doing a little bit better in their negative affect, but over the course of, as stress increased, they actually did worse than the older group. Similarly, we found that the younger group who started off at wave 1, not feeling so much the impacts of negative affect, by the time we got to wave 4, they were actually exceeding the 15 to 18-year-olds. Their slope was that much more steep. So again, this is really interesting to us to look at the kind of the ebb and flow and the development of how COVID is impacting student development. Okay, Cheryl, I'm on my last slide, so get ready because I'm going to turn it over to you in about 3 minutes. One of the uniquenesses of our study is that we looked at not only where students were stressed and where they were at risk, but we wanted to know also what was making them strong. And here's where I pull in my colleague, Michael Unger from Dalhousie University has a child and youth resilience measure, and it measures functioning in 3 areas: individual, so where do they get their support from, their peers, their own social skills, where do they get it from a caregiver, and then where do they get it from the context, maybe a spiritual context or an educational context. And here's where I'd love to show you more, but one line we'll have to do. Overall, at every wave of our data collection, so September, December, March, and June, resiliency, both the total score and those 3 subscales, remained amazingly stable. So even though we saw some changes in their emotion, in their behavior, in some of their abilities to stay on task and attentive, the resiliency factor stayed incredibly stable. Now, for those of you that like correlations and things like that, the thing I want to point out here is that all 3 of our resiliency scales were negatively correlated with all of the negative aspects of mental health, meaning as resiliency went up, all the negatives went down. And then on the other side, as the 3 resiliency factors went up, so did the students' self-reporting of their social and academic functioning. So resiliency matters not only as kind of a standalone kind of indicator of what's going on in their lives, but it also has some predictive value. And then lastly, again, I wanted to focus on those kids that have the previous diagnosis. Here's where we found that they did show a difference in their reporting of resiliency factors. They generally scored lower than kids who did not have a previously diagnosed mental health, cognitive, or learning disability. And then go back to that COVID concern questions. Students that were more concerned about their family and social well-being reported lower resiliency scores than those who had less concerns about their family. So all these factors work with each other and up against each other. And so this is really important for us when we start to talk at the end of tonight about kind of where students are at and what we can do to impact their development. So here's where I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl, because she is going to go, and I'm thankful for us doing this together, because she's going to, I've called this the lived experience of schools, and she's going to take over the discussion here and talk to you a little bit about student functioning from her perspective, and also some of the really important resources that we have at our disposal. All right, I am going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn this over to you, Cheryl.
Thank you very much, Kelly, for sharing your data with us. We were so privileged within Edmonton to be able to have the opportunity to partner with you and to be able to learn a little bit more about how COVID is impacting our students. So my next portion is going to talk a little bit about learning mental health and resiliency. So we know that we might all be in this COVID pandemic storm together, but everyone is really in their own boat, facing their own situations that they are dealing with. As Kelly has shown, whether it be that those students have experienced mental health concerns prior to the pandemic, how it's affected them versus how it has affected other students and our youth. So really we look at it as educators as being a shared responsibility. So it's taking a look at how, as educators in schools, working with our parents and our community partners, we've really taken the approach this year that we want it to be proactive. We want to work on supporting the mental health of our students, because we know that this is a really critical piece in our returning back to school for this school year. We know that our students are coming from, like I said, various places where they might have had increased stress or anxiety, or they might feel socially hesitant to be able to come back to a situation where they're with their peers, and they might not feel comfortable right now to be back at school, versus we might have some students that are really excited and go, I can hardly wait to be back in the classroom and being around students. So our teachers are really cognizant that we are dealing with many different types of students. But really, our schools are very much focused on creating those atmospheres that are safe, warm, caring, and supportive for every student. So when we look at it, we know that stress has really impacted our students at all different lengths. And I've chosen a video for us to watch today that explains about stress and how maybe it's not always a negative. And Kelly spoke about the importance of developing resiliency in our students. And so this video is going to be a video that I'm sharing, created by Alberta Health Services and Andrew Baxter's team from Mental Health Literacy. So we'll be watching this video, and I'm going to turn it over to the video now.
Often do you hear people say, I'm so stressed out right now, or that makes me so anxious? How many times have you said it yourself? We often confuse stress with anxiety, and this confusion has led many of us to become afraid of one of the most natural and important states of our physical and mental health, our stress response. It seems to make sense that if stress is such a big part of our lives, we ought to take some time to think about what stress actually is and how we can manage it. It turns out that even how we think about the stress response has a big impact on how it affects us. Unfortunately, stress has developed a bit of a bad rap recently. And while there are certain types of stress that are not good for us, most of it is actually helpful. In fact, working through daily stressors is precisely how we build skills and resilience. It's time to start changing the conversation about stress. So let's say we have a big challenge in our environment, which is called a stressor. It could be an exam, a big assignment, or really most problems that we face. We start to feel the physical symptoms. They might be a racing heart, rapid breathing, body tension, or not sleeping. We're confronted by the challenge, and if we make it through, the stress response subsides or gradually goes away. Here's a map of a normal stress response. It may come on more quickly or gradually, but that's the general idea. The stress response is normal. It's actually our body's best effort to get us ready to face the challenges that come our way. Without some level of stress, we don't perform well. Same thing goes if we have too much. Now let's go back to when we first experienced the stress response. This is when we're at an important point where we can choose how we interpret those physical sensations. Let's call them path A and path B. On path A, we can think, I'm so stressed out. I'm overwhelmed. Here we go again. I can't handle this, or I'm not going to go. Or on path B, we can think, my body's telling me I have something to face. This could be tough, but I'll find a way to get through it. My body's helping me to get ready to face this. These are two very different interpretations, and it turns out your interpretation of the stressor is what really matters. If we avoid situations or things that cause the stress response, it may make us feel better in the short term, but when we encounter the challenge again in the future, it actually makes the stress response even worse. On the other hand, if you think through what's causing your stress response in the first place, what strategies or problem solving you can use to face the challenge head on. It will reduce the intensity of the stress response. This is how we adapt and learn new skills to use the next time. Although the path B way of thinking may not come as naturally, and facing stressors takes courage, the more you practice this approach, the easier it will become. While the physical sensations of the stress response and anxiety are similar, the outcome is very different. The hallmarks of an anxiety disorder are persistent avoidance and withdrawal, where it causes major impairment in your life. That's more than just a stress response. So, putting this all together, let's start by labeling stress for what it is. Stress response. It's normal. It's a motivator. It isn't anxiety or depression. It's just stress. Next, check your thinking and try to interpret stress as helpful. I'm going to build some new skills. My brain is ramping up to help me get through this. Then, ask yourself, how am I going to step up to the problem causing me stress? What strategies do I have, and who can I ask for help? And finally, you may choose a helpful stress management technique, such as box breathing, mindfulness, physical exercise, or something else. But remember, calming strategies ultimately provide temporary relief until you're able to face the stressor. So, the more we understand our stress response, the easier it becomes to manage. For more information about stress and anxiety, check us out at teenmentalhealth.org.
Okay, so as educators, you can see that we really work on giving students the opportunity to be able to develop their skills and build their toolbox to build their resiliency. So within our schools, we're really focused on that curriculum delivery and how can through our curriculum delivery, we are able to connect with our students. So we take that approach really in the beginning of September is about focusing on building relationships and what we call that go-to educator, making the connections with our students. And we know that our students, the more they have the tools to be able to cope and adapt to our situations, they develop critical thinking, problem-solving skills, relationships, they're able to self-manage and social awareness. All of these skills work towards developing that resiliency. And so as teachers in schools right now, we're really working with all of our students, whether it be that they're students online or they're students in person, is being able to develop those resiliency skills so that they are able to be successful in their learning. So as parents are really that partner that work with us in educating our children and our students in our schools. So some tips that we talk about with our parents is really about strengthening the relationships with our students by developing with your child some daily and weekly routines and time together. We've spent a lot of time with our students, but really not only spending the time, but validating their feelings and listening to them, because we know that these feelings are real. They're personal to them, like Kelly indicated, and they have these feelings that they want to share with others. So it's being able to communicate, being able to listen and validate. We want to make sure that our children are able to still experience their opportunity to build upon their interests. We have here with us today our library, our public libraries, enabling them to be able to participate in programs and developing friendships and setting goals. So we work also with partners. That's the third piece. So it's schools, parents, and partners working together. And so here I would like to share with you a couple of tips of places that you can go to learn more as a parent. The first one is with Alberta Health Services. So I'm going to stop to share the screen now. And I'm going to share with you the Alberta Health Services website. And this is called the Caregiver Series. And the Caregiver Series is really a great series for parents. And here you can see that there is what we call our September calendar. And the September calendar is a variety of different offerings in which parents are able to access different types of online virtual sessions. And the sessions are slowly pulling up. We have sessions that at a glance, we have coming up with us right away is the technology and teenage brain. Recently, we had the functioning skills. We also have the lunch and learn, more than just a bed day, understanding depression in adolescence. We have mental health and resiliency. So you can see this is a huge focus on Alberta Health Services, strengthening our connections with our children and with our communities. So the caregiver series, each month they have a different team newsletter, and this is the feature for September. If you go down, you can see further explanation about each one of the sessions. So this is a great a tool for our parents to be able to use. The next one that I would like to share is going to be one that is from our parent caregiver series. And this one here is going to be one that is with mental health literacy. And mental health literacy is one that is really interesting. It again is one that is here in Alberta. And mental health literacy, you can go to I am a parent. When you look at the I am a parent section, in there you can pull up a variety of different resources. On the right-hand side, it talks about mental disorders. So you can go in here and learn a little bit more. And these two interesting resources, Teening Your Parent and Parenting Your Teen. And they're electronic resources that are available to you for be able to learn a little bit more about how it is as a parent and how do we work with our teens and how do we be able to work so that we can ensure that our teens are supported in their work. And so the last one I would like to go to is just our final slide. And that final slide is looking at the last piece, which is really that working together. So we know that there is a real importance in being able to work together. We know that as schools, parents and caregivers and our communities, our children can really have a successful year this coming academic school year 2021-2022. And it really is about working together to support our children and our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm definitely going to check out some of those resources. That's really valuable. And thank you to Dr. Schwartz. That data is fascinating. I've already looked at your website, but I really want to dig into it more. We're going to be turning it over to the Q&A section. So a reminder to our attendees that there is a Q&A button that you can click on and submit your question. We have a couple questions kind of related to the age range of the study. So the first is a bit of a clarification around how old were the youngest students in the study. Dr. Schwartz, can you take that one?
Yeah, so we the study was 12 to 18, and we did that mostly for a couple of reasons. One, we just knew from a school developmental level that we're basically talking about the junior high and senior high age ranges. So that essentially simplified a little bit our recruitment. But secondly, a lot of our measures that we use have only been normed or standardized with kids that are 12 and older. When you get into the younger age ranges, you rely lots on parent reports or on teacher reports. So this is why we wanted to get right into the student voices, and 12 was kind of our sweet spot for starting.
And this was a question that came up that was a bit related. I see you answered it a bit in text, but I was wondering if you could expound on it.
Right.
How can we kind of extrapolate this information for the younger grades? I think you did a really good job showing that even just maybe what you might think of as a few years, 12 to 14 and 15 to 18, we see a big difference.
Yeah.
So what do you think of when you think of the younger kids?
Yeah, for sure. And here's where it's kind of my cop-out response. Like, context matters so much. Like, how much were they in and out of school? Did they have to quarantine? Did they have that family income loss that they're experiencing that? What was their, family confinement and stress like? And I think younger kids are certainly used to being home more than our older kids. As you get to teenagers, they get lots more, or at least they think they have more independence. I don't know if they actually do, but they like to think that they do. So yeah, the younger student experience would be, quite different. And again, I think I kind of said this crudely in my response, was that so much of a child's response is based on how they see others around them responding too. So if they see their parents, their teachers, individuals that they do have contact with regularly, and they see those individuals, kind of processing it, taking it for what it is, freely sharing their emotions, getting mad, but also trying to experience, the good things about it. I think that really dictates, probably more so for younger kids than it even does for the teenagers in our sample. I don't know, Cheryl, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, I really think that the younger children, and whether we go from that whole span, we've seen from all the way from, that students that are coming into grade 1 all the way up to our grade 12 students, it really does depend on the context and
Right.
and where they were learning, if it was learning online or learning at home in their own place, or if they were learning in person in the classroom.
Right.
Because each
Right.
student learns a little different, and each student is within a different environment. So I think that if they had peers at home, that's another important piece.
Sure.
We heard from parents that were children of single children in a family, and that was very much different than children who came from ones that had siblings at home. So
Right. Right.
I might add too, just from my days of teaching and being a mom myself, that, one of the questions I always would ask my students, and I ask my daughter, is, what do you already know about this?
Right.
And I think about how COVID is in the media, it's in social media for those kids
Yeah.
that have access to their own devices. They're hearing things on the radio and from peers. And it's interesting to what you said, Cheryl, about having the conversation and having the connection. And I
Yeah.
think if you can develop that close conversation with your child and ask them what they already know about this, it's a great place to start, because you can see if they have misinformation and you can help clarify things, but then you can begin to have a conversation about their feelings and understand where they're at in
Yeah.
terms of their own resiliency. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah.
yes, and actually on the Alberta Health Services website that I shared, there's some questions that parents can use as conversation starters with their children to ask them and build those connections and see what they already know in some of the COVID responses. So I would suggest as parents to go check out that site and look
Yeah.
at some of the COVID resources that have been developed, because it really is the relationships piece is really critical during this time.
That's excellent. And that's a good segue, Emily, to what we do at the public library in terms of sharing
Yeah.
resources. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I was going to say too, I love that you mentioned about modeling. Modeling is something we talk a lot about at the library, and to do with early literacy, as simple as if a child sees you reading, they'll want to read.
Mhm.
And it's really interesting that modeling literacy also can relate to modeling resiliency. So that's really, that's a big takeaway for me for sure.
Well, thank you.
If I could jump in, Cheryl, we should have compared our slides before, because I'm glad I'm not sharing my parent slides, because they're very redundant with yours. So that's an awesome thing. But the only unique thing I had in mind was some really interesting research, including our own, coming out about modeling self-compassion, like being forgiving of yourself, and being forgiving of others. That's showing itself in our data set, and we measured that at 2 different times, and we just didn't have time to share that tonight. But when self-compassion goes up, self-reported stress goes down, confidence in social and academics goes up. We see some of those gender and age differences kind of flattening, because self-compassion is that powerful. So anytime as a parent we can laugh at ourselves, almost laugh at the frustrating experience that we're in, and not to make light of it, but just to say, like you said, Cheryl, it's the same storm we're in. We all are in a different boat, but the more we can kind of cut each other some slack and just recognize that there's nothing we can do necessarily to solve the pandemic. All we can do is, as the video was saying, change our thinking about it, really respond to what's happening in regards to, giving each other some space. And I think and we can model that, like that's a behavior that we can model for our kids. It's challenging. I don't want to make it sound easier than it is, because we all get frustrated. And I think that's the other thing too, is that the emotions that we have, even the strong negative ones, those are pretty natural. Like those are, we're all done with this. Like we are all would like to be finished with this. So the more we can acknowledge that in each other, recognize it, and essentially kind of handhold each other through this, I think that's a great modeling thing we can do too.
That is so interesting and important. Thank you so much for sharing and adding that, Dr. Schwartz. And on that note, we're almost at the end of tonight's session. I wanted to thank everybody very much for joining us tonight, to let you know that we did record the session, and both Edmonton Public Library and Calgary Public Library have kitchen table classroom websites. So you can go to those websites and you can see all the previous sessions we've done with amazing guest speakers on a variety of topics. And we also have blog posts and book lists tied to the topic. So we'll be sharing this session and some resources there. If tonight's topic interested you and you're in Calgary, I wanted to ask you to consider joining our session tomorrow night with the organization 19 to 0, where we'll be answering questions on COVID-19 vaccinations for children and youth. November's kitchen table session, we're planning that already. Emily and I are talking about what we're going to do there. It will be all about fostering anti-racism through diverse and inclusive children's books. So we hope you'll join us again in November. Please watch our websites and social media for registration details coming soon. And I'm going to leave it to Dr. Schwartz with some final remarks regarding the contributors to the study. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, let me end on a positive note here. I used to get asked, how do I make my kid resilient? How do I? And I would often say, well, put them in a situation where they, can't solve the problem on their own, where they're probably going to fail a little bit, where they're going to. I had no idea that a pandemic was coming, because we're all learning how to be more resilient. I love this quote from one of my colleagues, that says the pandemic won't last forever, but the lessons we teach our children about how to cope with adversity will last a lifetime. We're in a really interesting, critical time to teach our kids something that maybe no other or very few generations have been able to do with their kids. And so, the learning value of what we're going through, as painful as it is, and I don't want to downplay the pain that some families have experienced during this, but this is really going to be it's not even a teachable moment, it's a teachable era for us and our kids. Thank you. I wanted just to identify the research that we're doing is an absolute team approach and a team effort. And so I want to acknowledge all the people that I work with at the University of Calgary. I want to again highlight, I think this was in the chat, our covidstudentwellbeing.com website. We've got all 4 waves of data, infographics for every wave. So please go check that out. I want to thank Cheryl and all the other school divisions that are represented in our study. We, again, this is a unique thing that brought 4 school divisions together to do this research, and I, as a researcher, do not take that lightly. We are very privileged to work with these school divisions. And then lastly, our study is funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, so just wanted to give them a shout out. Thanks, Kate. I'll turn it back to you to close us off, or Emily. And again, thanks for allowing us to be with you tonight.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure. Emily and I feel very lucky to be able to do this series and to get to meet such interesting speakers doing amazing work in our province. So I have put the link to Calgary's Kitchen Table Classroom website in the chat, as well as many links to the various things we talked about tonight. We will follow up by email to all participants to let you know where you can find the recording and other resources. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we hope you have a wonderful week. Take care.